Hello guys and welcome. Today I'm going to show you 3 different weird decks from the secret list of LSS. These are 3 decks that are, some heroes that we have seen before that have a slightly different play style or a way more fun play style. These decks might not be the most consistent choices, but they are slightly new ways of approaching each hero. So if you want to spice up your armories or you want to try something completely different with your friend or in an event, you can check out the video. Thanks for being here and let's move on. So first of all, we have a Hatchet Vestige combo Boltyn. So the main idea with this deck is that we are trying to execute the traditional combo Boltyn, with meaning we want to charge, play to Luminas and attack a bunch of times, but rather than having the free attacks with the sabers, we actually are looking to manually pay for the 6 attacks with Hatchet of Body and Mind and with a Gallantry Gold and whichever other attacks we need. And in order to do that, we need Vestige of Soul. So how that deck works is pretty similar in the gameplay aspect, that we try to build up a soul and at some point we go off, but when we go off hard. So what's different with this deck? First of all, the yellow count is super high and the light count is super high in order to be able to activate Vestige of Soul. And we also run cards like Prayer of Bellona, because the turn we want to go off, we want to draw as many cards as possible in order to find our Tomes of Divinities and our Tomes of Fiendal, in order to play them and get even more cards to be able to fuel the many resources we need in order to attack 6 times with the hatchets. The only cards we run are cards that turn the combo into an absolutely killing turn, because this type of Boltyn is heavily committed on the combo. If you never manage to perform a big turn with tomes and do a huge attack with hatchets, your damage output is not there to end the game. So we try to go as all in as possible to the combo. That's why we include cards like Oath of Steel, and that's why we include cards like Spill Blood. So why are we using hatchets also? So Hatchet of Body and Hatchet of Mind have something that's easily missed unless you are a seasoned warrior player. Hatchet of Body, for instance, reads: whenever you attack with Hatchet of Body, if Hatchet of Mind was the last attack this turn, Hatchet of Body gets +1 power until the end of the turn. Meaning, when we start to perform our combo with Hatchet of Body and Mind, the first Hatchet will not get a +1, but the second Hatchet will get +1 for all 3 of its attack. Then we attack again with Hatchet of Body, and now Hatchet of Body will get +1 for the rest of the turn. And now we attack again with Hatchet of Mind, and now Hatchet of Mind gets +2 for the rest of the turn. So that, if we manage to attack all the 6 times, that most of the time means we get 1, 2, 4, 6, 9 more damage. And most of the time it's 9 points of damage that we were not going to deal. If we are being a bit more realistic, that most of the time means 7, because most of the times when you execute a traditional Boltyn combo, if the opponent probably will block at least 1 or 2 saber attacks that will trigger the sabers. So in comparison to the sabers, the hatchets have 7 more damage, but again, that's not the point. The main point is that we want to do a huge turn, and if we do not end the game on the spot, we want to have built up a big enough soul and manage to end the game with either Beacon of Victory or Celestial Cataclysm, or try to find a way to end the game, or with cards like V for Vanguard. So we also, a big part of this deck is that the fact that we run Tome of Fiendal. The main reason we run Tome of Fiendal is that we activate Mage Master Boots, we play Tome of Fiendal in order to keep fueling and getting more cards. It's pretty important to note with this deck that most of the time with the turn we go off, we do not want to leave it to chance the card we are going to charge with. That's why our favorite cards that we want to use the turn we go off is probably Take Flight or V for Valor, only if we have Spirit of Irina on board. With this deck, Spirit of Irina is slightly more important than the traditional combo Boltyn deck, but it's slightly easier for us to find Spirit of Irina because on the turn we go off we will look at a lot more cards, so it's slightly easier to play Spirit of Irina, because if we have Spirit of Irina on board, Lumina will generate action points, and generating action points means we can do stuff like going off with Tome of Yendal or attacking with a Hatchet, triggering V for Valor in order to charge, and then play our Luminas, which is also pretty relevant sometimes. So, as sideboard, we mainly have a small sideboard for Arcane, because the deck is that type of decks where you cannot really sideboard too much, because the deck doesn't really work without Hall of Illumination, because you need the turn where you want to play the tomes to manually add a card in Soul. You need the Vestige, otherwise it's impossible to pay for all 6 of the Hatchet attacks. And Gallantry Gold, I mean, it's 6 points of damage in the turn we go off that we need in order to close up the game. So equipment wise we did not change a lot of stuff, that's why we have a small respect for Kano with Null Rune Boots and Oasis. And somewhat the same goes with That's All You Got. Ninja has to be a weird matchup, so getting attacked by small attacks and drawing card backs to prevent the Kodaches and stuff is pretty relevant. Time Snap is mainly there for Prism, because if we start executing our combo and our opponent plays a Sentinel, we pretty much lose on the spot. So against Prism, most of the time we want to start executing our combo while having a Time Snap on board, meaning that we cannot get locked by a Sentinel. So the other small package that we have in the sideboard that we are mainly using versus Dromai is the Bolting Blade and Banneret of Vigor package that we want to use sometimes when we want to be slightly more aggressive, like cutting the soul shields in order to, cutting the soul shields mainly and trimming a bit of the other cards in order to increase our popper and have a few more resources to actually, perform a big, when we want to perform our big turn. So, I've been having a blast so far with this Boltyn. I mean, if you do like the explosive Boltyn deck, this deck is super fun to play. We had some amazing games during the streams these past few weeks, and if you want to try out a different flavor of combo Boltyn, you should totally give it a try, because I mean, playing back-to-back tomes and drawing a billion cards and then, pulling off the combo is so much fun. But some people will hate you, but it's so much fun, trust me. So that's it with Boltyn. You can check down below the links for all the decks, so have fun. So moving on, the other deck I want to show you is an actual big Dragon Dromai. I was about to call this deck a blue Dromai deck, but most of the time we have in our mind blue Dromai as the aura deck, and this is not an aura deck. This is a traditional Dromai. We want to play our dragons, we want to attack with our dragons, but there is some spice. As you can see here, we have a huge blue count, because here we are not looking to flood the board with Ash Wings and stuff. We are looking to play the big, devastating dragons of the deck. So if you want to ever cast and attack with the Dragon Optimize, this is the deck for you. So as equipment we use Tunic. We do not even have the red count for Fernance. Ash is not important in this deck as in traditional Dromai, because we're not generating Ash Wings, so every Ash we generate is effectively a dragon. So in most games you never need more than 5 Ash. So again, there is no reason to run Fernance. So Providence is required because we have a lot of non-blocks, we have a lot of cards that we might keep in arsenal because our deck revolves around a lot, actually triggering Phantasmal Footsteps. That's sometimes how we trick the opponent into getting action points and actually doing some extra plays, and Tunic really helps with that. I mean, playing a big attack, getting popped, using the Tunic, and then play another big attack is one of the lines that this deck actually has access to, which is not a traditional type of illusionist we've seen yet, because even the old Prism never actually had the blue count to play that type of deck. So let's get into the deck. We have a bunch of big illusionist attacks like Ember Moss Senpai, like Phantasmaclasm, like Dunebreaker Senpai. We really like forcing the opponent into popping them, and if they do not do that, it's slightly of a win-win situation for us, because the illusionist phantasm cards are a bit over, are slightly above statted because of the phantasm keyword, so we want to try and capitalize to that as much as possible. We want to play a mid-rangey type of game where we block with 2 cards, do a big attack, and do these trades because our attacks are actually huge. So obviously we run all the big dragons. Necria is also great in this deck because we can actually invoke her. So the main reason we use Chromai and Miragai is Chromai sometimes we like because we have so many stuff to do with our action point. Actually generating a Chromai in order to develop a new dust from the Red Desert is pretty relevant. As you can see, we run 3 copies of Viscerai, and Viscerai probably is one of the most important dragons in this deck because actually we want Viscerai to connect in this deck. Actually, a big part of our game plan is to actually develop a Viscerai and force them to connect, because most of the time what's going to happen is you're going to slam a Viscerai. If you have a way to protect the phantasm keyword and do not allow the opponent to simply pop Viscerai, most of the time the opponent will be forced to use 2 if not 3 cards to block Viscerai and then use his action to attack with a weapon in the Viscerai. So Viscerai actually is a huge tempo swing with us most of the time, and is the damage that we need to do in order to be able to close out the game. So how do we do that? Money where your mouth is. A pretty interesting card from Heavy Hitters that actually has a type of text in non-attack actions that we have almost never seen before. I think the other card we've seen that already has been Hack Reality. The interesting part with Money Where Your Mouth is that it calls for the next attack in general, meaning any attack. And the important part here is that Money Where Your Mouth is actually increases the attack value of Viscerai. You can even wager a gold while attacking with Viscerai for 9. I mean, that was the main reason I wanted to try out and build this deck. And with this deck you struggle a bit against aggressive strategies, but you're not as susceptible to mid-range deck or heavy power decks as you might expect. Because we have such a huge blue count, we can also include Semblance, which is also a pretty important piece of this puzzle, because sometimes, we can attack with the Viscerai, the opponent thinks it has Phantasm, they pop Viscerai, we play the Semblance, and now 3 damage goes through because the opponent was not expecting, did not fully block, they thought they were going to pop Viscerai. So we prevent with Semblance Viscerai from popping, and now we leaked 6 damage while forcing to remove a pop from their hand, and most of the time in their following turn they're going to just deal with Viscerai and give us back a full turn cycle, a full hand. Ivofide is not that important, but it's a slightly interesting touch because all of the legendary dragons, Dominia, Optima, and Tumulti all care about the top cards of our deck, and because we have such a huge blue count, we don't want to miss is the most efficient thing we can do with Ivophidia, but obviously it's not that relevant. We also have an extra blue in inventory if we want to switch that out. I mean, against matchups that we want to block a lot, we already should be cutting it. Hold the Line is a card I like in Dromai in general and versus aggressive strategies, and the particular reason why I like this card more in this type of deck is that a lot of times our turn cycle is pitch a blue, play big attack like Senpai, and threaten the fact that if they pop, we're going to do something extra with our action point. And if they do not pop it, we're just going to slam the card in Arsenal. So slamming a Hold the Line in the Arsenal is nice. You know, there are these type of cards that we love putting in Arsenal because it's so efficient. Because otherwise, if they pop us, we want to play the Passing Mirage, you know, play Pierce Reality and all that jazz. So the reason again we have Providence is that we do that play pattern a lot, and sometimes we don't want to do the super. I mean, we're still getting popped and we do not really care about developing a second Passing Mirage, for instance, or we don't really care about keeping a semblance in Arsenal because it's, you know, versus a more aggressive strategy and the game is not in that state. We can just slam the semblance in Arsenal and just kick it away with Crown of Providence, which is a bit important in this deck. So, if you wanted to try out a bit of a heavier Dromai deck with a bit of more of the big dragons, you can have fun with this list. With this list, I have respected the heavy popper decks a bit too much because otherwise the matchup might feel impossible. But if your local metagame does not have a lot of these KOs and Guardians, you can probably trim a few of these cards like Frightmares and Lost in Thought and include a bit more anti-aggro cards like, you know, red Enigma Chimeras or some red 1/4/5 Go Against and all that jazz. But in the heavy popper matchups, we are looking to side in Frightmare and cut the Necrias. And this is probably one of the decks that it's most likely that you will be able to play a Frightmare because we manipulate footsteps so much. We have the tunic for the extra research to have a bit of a more air to be able to do that. So, again, another reason why I wanted to play this deck was the fact that I wanted to, at some point, play Frightmare. It's super fun. Sometimes, you know, it's clunky, but it's interesting. And Lost in Thought is great because with this deck, if the opponent does not have a popper and we know our Vinzerakai or Dominia can go through, or, you know, we remove their attack and they can no longer kill Optimi, for instance, in their turn, it's pretty huge to do stuff like this versus heavy poppers deck. So, again, if you want to try a bit of a more of a blue illusionist while still relying on the dragons, have fun with the actual big Dragon Dromai. And last but not least, we have a traditional Rune-Chant aggressive Visserai. So, I've seen in the past few months that after Heavy Hitters got released that Visserai got a lot of hype regarding a list around Sonata Galaxia and, you know, around developing a huge amount of rune chants and looming doom the opponent to death. We are not doing any of that stuff. We are back into traditional aggressive rune chant Visserai. So, we are an aggressive deck. We are trying to utilize the rune chants to not only deal damage but also discount some of our attacks. That's why we're running all the hot cards that care about rune chants like Amplify the Arknight, Rune Flash, and of course the main reason we built this deck was the fact that we wanted to play Arknight Ascendancy, and it is a blast when you actually manage to pull off a non-attack in order to increase the power of Ascendancy into attacking with Ascendancy into an opponent that has its equipment trimmed. It's such a blessing to actually live this moment, so we try to do that as much as possible. Also, Revel in Runeblood is an insane card. Imagine how much more insane it is when the rune chants you create also turn into resources in order to play cards like Arknight Ascendancy or Amplify the Arknight or Runeflesh. So it's a pretty traditional, it has the expected cards you expect from a heavy rune chant Viscerai. We have Spellblade Assault, we have Spellblade Strike as rune generation, we have 2 copies of Read the Runes that we either want to block with our hand and set up and play Read the Runes, set up a card in Arsenal, block with 2 cards and play Read the Runes, so that's the main play pattern. Or something that we can do way more freely is actually activate the Spellbound Creepers and play that either on opponent's turn with Tunic while we have blocked with an attack, or during our own turn while we're attacking with something that, while we have some resources left, because we get more resources by having Rune Chants. So a lot of interesting choices with Read the Runes. We are slightly more on the defensive side because versus the most mid-range aggressive decks, we want to block a lot. We want Viscerai. Probably the biggest problem about Viscerai at the moment is the fact that he's not consistent enough, because when you actually get that good mix of resources and non-attacks and attacks and cards with go again and cards that need your action point, when you get a good mix of these cards, actually Viscerai feels immense, feels like a super powerful mixed damage arcane deck. But a lot of times you get these weird 3 blue cards that do nothing, or that, the notorious 4 non-attack hands with Viscerai. So that's why with this deck we have prioritized blocking a bit more, because we want to actually take the time from the game, lose some turns by blocking in order to give ourselves more opportunities to draw these good mixes of actually good amount of attacks and non-attacks and rune chants and generation and all that shenanigans. We are going pretty hardcore on the rune chant generation. We almost have every single aggressive card that we can have access to. So let's talk a bit more about, I'm just going to talk about a few cards that might seem weird. I mean, everyone knows that has been followed Viscerai that Oath of the Arknight is a slightly below rate card, because it's actually a class card that's barely giving 4 value and it has a weird cost. That's not what's important in this. The most important part about this card is that it blocks 3, which is pretty relevant, and it's a pretty easy extender in our hand, and the main reason it's the 5th card apart from the 3 Runic Reckonings that actually increase the power of the Arknight Ascendancy, and that's the main reason why we want to have Oath of the Arknight in our deck. So increase the power of an Arknight Ascendancy is actually how we defeat a lot of aggressive strategies that do not have access to a lot of equipment. So we want to do versus aggressive strategies a value block trade type of gameplay in order to set up these immensive turns, and also this deck should have a decent chance into Guardians and Illusionists, because it's so weird for Illusionists to deal with a lot of rune chants. Prism, because they do not enjoy having to block a bunch of 1 damage instances with their angels, and Dromai, because most Dromai decks run at most 3 to 6 blues at best. So it's pretty hard for them to deal with runes, and so that's the main reason why we are playing this deck. And versus Guardians like Victor and Bravo, if we can take our sweet time to set up these huge turns by increasing the number of, rune chants generation we have and adding a bit more gas to the deck, we can actually set up these huge turns and, attack them once or twice, and that probably will be enough to close up a game. So in general, that's it about Viscerai. Balance of Justice versus Providence is pretty close. I think Traditionally, Viscerai prefers to have Providence for the same reason why we said that you want a good mixture of cards, and Viscerai probably is one of the decks that can utilize so good having the right type of cards in his hand. So that's why Providence is so useful in the Viscerai. But I had in my personal games sometimes versus these really aggressive strategies like Ninja or Kaio, you need sometimes that extra value of Balance of Justice. But again, Providence is just as good, or again, if your local meta has a different, has a lot of Guardian and everyone is running CNC and Pummel and you want the Providence, it's as a legit card. I mean, the Balance of Justice versus Providence for all these mid-range type of strategies will be an eternal struggle. So at the moment, my take for this deck's Balance of Justice, but I could totally see Crown of Providence being played here. So the rest is pretty traditional blue cards, a few copies of Mavern Skies, a few copies of red Mavern Skies for Dromai, and just Slay. A lot of respect for Kano, because we are an aggressive strategy and we don't want to get destroyed by Kano. If your local scene has a lot of Kano, this is a decent deck versus them, because we can always dump our hand into the offense and we have pretty free 3 Arcane Barrier plus the extra Spell Void from Amethyst Tiara. So again, that's it about Viscerai. In general, all these 3 decks, and the fact that's so amazing about Flesh and Blood at the moment is that all of these 3 decks are not that far away out of being decent decks. They probably are not as consistent, but probably if you're watching this video, you're not here for the consistency of the deck. You're here for the explosion and the fun of these decks. But even from a tournament perspective, I think these decks actually do fit somewhat in the metagame, because actually building a deck that differently gives a slightly different matchup spreads into some matchups, and that's actually a pretty good thing. I mean, having access to a billion combo cards versus Guardian probably is a good way to play as Boltyn, and the same thing goes a bit with Viscerai. I mean, running a Viscerai versus an Illusionist and Dromai heavy environment is pretty interesting. And Dromai might, out of these decks, Dromai might be the weirdest one, because the traditional Dromai deck already has a lot of consistently good matchups. But probably the biggest part about this Dromai is that if your meta, for instance, has a lot of Vincets or has a lot of Kanos, and I mean, or the expected different type of Dromai, you might catch some people off guard by running that type of list. So again, guys, thanks a lot for being here. I really hope you have fun playing this deck. If you have seen any other weird deck, any other type of different kind of build, I would love to see them in the comments, or if you have any notes about any of the existing decks. Again, thanks for being here and see you around.